Let me begin this session with a comment that you've heard a societal perspective, a managerial perspective, and a policy perspective, and maybe you hear some repetitive motifs, and I hope in this last session we can still discover some nuggets which are a little bit new. I take a feather out of Bruce Haas's hat. He said where he was coming from, and I also want to say that so that you can understand my perspective here. I'm Nigel Room. I work in a business school. I am an academic, and I'm very pleased to be joined on a panel talking about policy by somebody who represents business, somebody who has insight into the policy process, and somebody who looks at that from the viewpoint of NGOs. They're going to be talking a little about their perspective. Let me say something about mine. I'm an academic. That means I'm interested in knowledge and knowledge development. But I'm not simply an academic. I'm a business academic. So I'm interested in know-how. Not simply knowledge, but know-how. Knowing how to do things. Because I'm supposed to be an educator and developer of managers of the future, and they need to know how to do things as well as to need to have knowledge about things. And the last thing that I'd like to say in preface to this session is that I'm an increasingly old academic. And in the panels today we've heard use the C word, complexity. And when I heard this word, I was reminded of Ashby's law of requisite variety, which maybe you're not familiar with. Maybe it's not part of your knowledge set. But I'll remind you of what Ashby's law of requisite variety says. It says, in simple environments, organizations can manage well by being simple. But in complex environments, if organizations are to be effective and relevant, they have to be as complex as the environment that they're dealing with. And that is a real managerial challenge. And I'll link it to the first 2 points. It's a challenge for managers, not just the organizations. So I want to reintroduce the manager into a discussion about policy. Because it seems to me that the biggest challenge we have in dealing with impacts is the challenge of dealing with complexity in a relatively simple way, whilst retaining our understanding of complexity. So, to help us with that, I have to press this button. I have a panel, as I say, with Gerhard Pretorius, who is the head of CSR and sustainability at Volkswagen, Jerome Chaplier, who is the coordinator of the European Coalition for Corporate Justice, who has an NGO perspective on this, and Piotr Madziar, who is the policy officer at a Unit 2 of the DG Internal Markets, dealing with corporate governance and social responsibility. That's a good panel to have discussing the policy implications of the impact study. Let me set out some background to this, the policy context. We've heard Lisbon Gothenburg strategies and agendas. They placed an emphasis on competitiveness and growth, with social inclusion, notably quality of jobs, and linked that to sustainability. And this was to be achieved, if I remember correctly, by innovation in business and society, and by responsibility. More recently, we've seen the communication that we've heard mentioned, COM 2011-681, which talks about CSR in terms of creating shared value and responsibility for positive and negative impacts arising from a company's activities. Okay, that's the policy context. I think you're familiar with that. Let's turn from that to some of the key findings that we have from our project. Many managers that we spoke to, not companies, but many managers in companies and other organizations that we spoke to, really had quite a poor knowledge They didn't have much good knowledge about European policy goals and EU's commitment to CSR, the links between corporate responsibility and innovation, competitiveness and sustainability weren't necessarily the province that they were working in all the time. They worked in parts of that, but the understanding of the connections between these ideas. There was confusion about the difference between performance and social impact. There was confusion about the links between CSR and sustainability. Maybe you're familiar with that from your own work. When I've talked to people before this session, they said, oh, well, it would be nice to know better what the relationship is between corporate responsibility and sustainability. It would be nice to know what is the connection between sustainability and sustainable development, for example. Now, if people nod, that means it's confusing. We also found that it seemed strategically more important for companies to have a CSR function than necessarily to have a strategic commitment to the content of what the CSR department did. Right? Having it shows that you're doing it. What you do doesn't really matter as long as you've got somebody who you can show. However, on the very positive side, managers were very interested in the ideas of being able to trace the relationship between what they did in companies and the impacts on society. But no one really knew how to do it. And when we talked about it, they said that's complex. As if you would expect it to be simple. If it was simple, we'd probably be doing it already. There was very little knowledge about impact pathways, from activities to impacts. There was no standard methods, tools, and techniques. We've heard that. Right? So this is about knowledge and know-how. Knowledge and know-how. Beyond that, we didn't just look at organizations, we looked at intermediaries. We've heard comment on that. We looked at organizational networks promoting CSR. We looked at rating agencies focusing on sustainability and responsibility. Parts of the project looked at organizations like the Global Reporting Initiative. Impact thinking, impact approaches were not widely deployed in these organizations any more than they were widely deployed in our case studies and our data sets. Impact thinking, impact approaches, like the SIAM method, have very broad similarities to management systems, which we also heard about a lot this afternoon. Yet, probably about 70% of companies or more that we studied don't have certified systems in place to support environmental management. So basically, we're trying to propose a way of thinking about your impacts which isn't in the majority anyway. That raises some interesting questions about know-how among managers. Know-how among managers. And that leads me to my two policy areas and then some questions. There are two central policy issues as I see it. One is a strategic one. It dawns on me that there's an enormous gap between the rhetoric of EU strategies and agendas, competitiveness, growth, quality of jobs, social inclusion, sustainability, and the operational activities of the European Commission. And there's a tremendous gap between the aspirations at strategic level and the operations of companies. In this sense, one of our biggest challenges is the disconnect between strategy and practice. People strategize by putting big concepts together. Managers do little things. Operationally, I think there's an enormous gap between the thrust of EU EC strategies and agendas and the 2011 communication on the one hand, and the absence of detailed actions and levers that are there to create change in terms of impacts. So we have a nice statement in COM 681, but it's not supported by telling us how to do anything. It just tells us what it is we should be doing. We should be looking at impacts. And those, I think, are the two big challenges in a policy sense, right? One is at the strategic level, the other is at the very operational level. So I have two sets of questions, one strategic and one operational, and I'm going to outline them, and then we'll go back to this one, and we'll discuss them, and then we'll go to the second one. The strategy policy questions are, is the European Commission truly committed to the idea of responsibility for impacts as part of its strategy for Europe 2020, both for European business and European society? Is it really committed? And what more needs to be done to make that responsibility for impacts a central part of the Commission's thinking across the DGs and their policy areas? If it's got to be embedded in companies, surely it has to be embedded in the Commission's work. And in operational terms, let's assume that the Commission is committed to responsibility for impacts. Then how are they going to promote that approach in business, in the minds of managers, whether they're CEO or operationally responsible for CSR? Who are they going to do that work with? We've heard some discussion of that, but in a policy sense, who are the preferred partners of choice to make this happen? And is that going to be achieved through the work that's being done on reporting, mandatory reporting? Is that going to advance accountability for impacts? It may, in part, if the question is what else needs to be done if it only does it in part. So those were my question areas. What I'm going to do is to go back to the first one. I'm going to join my panelists, and I'm going to invite them to say something about themselves and then to try to respond to the strategic policy questions in the first instance from their perspectives, and then to, after that, we'll go on to the operational ones, and then we'll open it to the floor. Thank you. Gentlemen, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself first, and then we go into the answers to the questions. Gerhard.
Well, I think it's not necessary to add much more. As you already told the audience, I'm responsible for CSR and sustainability at the Volkswagen Group. I joined Volkswagen Group 20 years ago, was there in different functions in the research department, environmental department, and I think you can imagine a company which has now more than 550,000 employees, manages 102 locations around the world, and try to sell nearly 10 million cars, which are produced day by day. I think today we are producing 40,000 cars per workday. So you can imagine there is a lot to do. I think all in all, we made remarkable improvement also concerning sustainability and CSR, and I think I will there start with some remarks. But before I will do so, concerning your questions, I think we should understand policy context much broader than to evaluate the actual policy of the EU Commission, because you can and may understand that a business man shouldn't go too much in detail by evaluation concrete policy matters. But all in all, I think, let me start a little maybe with a provocative thesis. I know, and it is absolutely the business of research to criticize, and it's necessary to criticize the actual state of development and all these things, and I heard a lot of very, very fruitful recommendations during the afternoon. But I think it's also necessary that we have to be aware that all in all, from my point of view, the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, we made really a very, very strong improvement concerning CSR and sustainability in all the arenas, in the political or policy arena, as well as in the civil society arena, and of course in the business arena. Maybe it is a little bit difficult because we have all, let's say, a kind of two pictures in our mind. The one side is, so to speak, the big picture. We all know there are very, very strong challenges concerning CO2 emissions, concerning water resource scarcity, concerning biodiversity, concerning the social drift. I think this is one of the most serious challenges at the global level. The social drift, this increase of inequality and all these things. This is a part of the big picture. But On the other side, we have also to be aware we made this very, very strong improvement at this, let's say, micro level, especially when I can try to exemplify it on the view of my company. All in all, let's say in the last 10, 15 years, we really made a change and we accept this, what you can call a strategic approach of CSR. We are now really very near to what you are calling the core business, because we set up very, very ambitious targets. We set up strong management procedures about the whole group, reporting standards and all these things. So all in all, I think we have to take in our mind, we made already very, very strong improvement in the last years. Without any doubt, it's not enough. But I think this is a basic for all the next steps, and therefore I think we have to emphasize a little bit about what was really the result of the last 10, 15 years before we go on to discuss a lot of these other problems. And maybe let me add on another thing. Who are the main drivers? On the one side, without any doubt, policy framework, NGOs, and all these things. But, and I think this is very important, and sometimes I miss this as a point in the discussion. From my point of view, the main driver of CSR is business, and especially the business competitors, because who are our main drivers? Without any doubt, our suppliers and our customers, because we have a very complex value chain. And you may know our customers, for example, who are buying big fleets of our products, are really also international companies, and they are exactly organized as we are. They have also a strategic approach. There are hopefully as good managers as at Volkswagen working. They have very ambitious targets, and they exactly expect from us that we fulfill their targets with our products. And therefore, the main driver in the actual discussion is really that the business is driving the business in this field. Without any doubt, we need also a political framework, and there are some good ideas, as far as I can see, some less good ideas. We have to discuss about it, because, for example, you have to take in your mind, for a company like ours, it is really a kind of a limit of resources answering all the expectations we get daily on our desk. This is not only the questionnaire of academic research, without any doubt. It's important that we try to do our best. But really to fulfill the requests concerning reporting, concerning reviews and all the other things, this is really managing a lot of very, very different ideas. And from this point of view, I'm a little bit in fear that some of the actors we are discussing about are, let's say, destroying the success model of the last years. I will try to explain it on one point of view. From my point of view, all in all, let's say the GRI standards of reporting are a success model in the last years, because they are becoming a quasi-standard, and we are discussing about this at a level for all companies. But without going into detail, concerning the version 3.1 with 4.0, from my point of view, it is going completely in the wrong direction, because there is an expectation that we should answer in detail some of the indicators we can't do. By doing all our efforts, we can't do. And therefore, I see not an added value in the much more going up of details in all these indicators. I think we had a lot of remarkable ideas in the last two panels. What is really the added value of an indicator? How you can comparable and all these things. We should discuss this, and I think we need there all, the experience of business, the ideas of academic research and so on. But when you compare all these things, there are some really expectations concerning the level of reporting, concerning the details of reporting. This is curious, this is ridiculous. And therefore, from my point of view, I fear on the one side, we are going in the right direction, as I mentioned earlier, but there are some fears on the road, and especially what we observed in the past as success models are now going the wrong direction. So I will stop at this point.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you very much. I'm pleased that you're provocative there, and we'll come back to the question of how a leading company like Volkswagen, what it would be looking for in operational terms, because you've identified some of the challenges, but also I'll give you an opportunity as our other panelists speak to think about how you would like to support the direction of Europe in the coming 10 years or so, because you've told us that too much detail is too much. Let's move to Jérôme. Jérôme Chaplier works with an NGO, and I wonder if you see from your viewpoint that the strategy of the Commission is truly joined up in terms of impacts and corporate responsibility or not. Maybe you'll feel free to comment on the Commission.
Yeah. Well, the easy answer to your question is no. We don't think that the Commission is currently really putting in place the policies that answer the new drive to CSR, which is focused on impact. And I will explain why, just as an introduction, so that you know from which perspective I'm speaking now. ECCJ is a coalition of NGOs, academics, trade unions, consumer organizations in 15 European countries, representing altogether over 250 organizations. And this is the perspective that I will bring here, the perspective of those impacted by corporate operations, by people in supply chains in other countries as well as inside Europe, who are the ones affected by those impacts. And I will try to bring as many concrete examples as possible. As you said, you want knowledge, and there's clearly some kind of knowledge that NGOs can bring in the debate. We document a lot of these cases. ECCJ members do not as such promote CSR. We do promote corporate accountability, and as you may know, this is not the same, at least in the way CSR is understood and implemented today. It's an important distinction. I think there's a consensus today that companies have a duty to respect human rights and the environment, to be socially responsible for their impacts. States have a duty as well to protect human rights and the environment. That includes putting in place legislations, policies to ensure that private actors are held accountable for their impacts. These duties of states and these duties of companies are not excluding each other. It's up to companies, of course, to internalize how they will meet this responsibility to be socially responsible. But it's up to states to define what is this expected corporate behavior, this expected responsibility, what is right and what is wrong, what is the scope and the minimal outcome of a CSR policy. And states must control, they must ensure scrutiny of what companies are doing and possibly sanction those who don't meet this responsibility. So please know that I'm not a CSR expert as such. I would present myself rather as a corporate accountability advocate. The main message for today that I would make in my presentation is that both companies and states must have an impact thinking in CSR, just like this project insists on. But today, they both failed to deliver enough. Not enough impact-oriented corporate accountability or CSR policies put in place by states, and not enough impact-oriented CSR policies by companies. We welcome the new definition of CSR. No longer CSR is seen as a process, as a methodology, as a set of internal policies. No, CSR is about taking responsibility for its impacts around the globe. And impacts is what NGOs have been talking about for decades now. And this shift was needed, and we welcomed this shift. But the question now is indeed, and this is reflecting to Nigel's question, how did this shift in the EU approach to CSR translate into concrete policies, legislation, tools, guidance to ensure that companies do identify and address their impacts, especially the adverse impacts. ECCJ is a member, together with Amnesty International and Friends of the Earth Europe, of the Multi-Stakeholder Forum on CSR, established by the European Commission, and we shared in this forum some disappointment about the lack of progress. And I will illustrate it with, by taking this perspective of those affected in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and also in Europe, of course, by companies' operations. Many of our members are documenting tens of examples of human rights violations, environmental violations. They make a commitment to those affected there that we in Europe, we NGOs in Europe, will call the EU to take measures to put an end to this misbehavior by some of the European companies. So imagine I would be sitting now in front of a Nigerian farmer whose land has been polluted by an oil spill, and he can't get a remedy, and there's no solution brought to this problem. What should I tell him about what the European Union is doing to prevent this from happening? Should I tell him, well, there's a new CSR award scheme? Should I say there's a new guidance in 3 sectors developed by the Commission? The EU is now monitoring commitments by companies to take into account the internationally accepted CSR principles and guidelines. Should I tell about the EU implementation of the UNGPs that is now 1 year late? Should I talk about this future reform on non-financial reporting that indeed, if it is approved as it is now, will not have companies disclose the adverse impacts they have outside Europe? So yes, it's a bit provocative, of course, to say it that way. But I think some of the improvements, and there are improvements, I share it. If you look back to 10, 15 years ago, there are improvements. But does it really meet, is it really an answer to the challenge faced by those affected by communities? We don't think so. So some interesting moves like greenwashing directive, non-financial reporting, public procurement, it is true, it is happening, and we shouldn't deny this. But I think that while the new discourse on CSR focuses on addressing impacts, we see little evidence that the new and promising approach promoted by the Commission is really reflected in practice. Just 2 figures to illustrate that it's not only an NGO call, it's also a signal, very strong signal sent by European citizens. Recent surveys brought 3 interesting elements. First, the trust in business is very low. It's not getting better with the austerity that we are facing now. More than 40% of European citizens think companies have a negative impact on society. There's a lack of transparency and information on these impacts. 62% of EU citizens do not feel informed about the impacts of companies on the environment and on their lives. And the need for EU action, almost 9 out of 10 European citizens, 87%, agree that it is the role of EU decision makers to ensure private companies comply with social and ethical standards when operating abroad. I think those are very strong signals. I would say that I agree with many of the conclusions of the study. Impact thinking is essential. Managers need to do better, and most of them, and we are talking also to companies, NGOs are not those cynical people always saying that companies do bad things. Most of the people managing companies, they want to do better, but indeed there are not enough standards and methods now to help business really operational this impact thinking. Too often CSR is still seen as an add-on to key corporate business. From our experience, CSR is too often just a matter of a CSR unit or a sustainability department in the company. But this, the respect for human rights and environment must be embedded in all departments. It must be in the heart of the decision-making process. There must be coherence. Just to take one example, in a textile company, if you have at the same time the department in charge of purchasing products using reverse auctions, enchères inversées, to place orders that put extreme pressure on prices and delays, and at the same time there's a nice code of conduct to improve safety at work and the quality of jobs, those 2 departments are just contradicting each other. You don't by the way you put pressure on your subsidiaries, your your suppliers, you don't enable them to truly propose quality jobs. Another lesson from the project that I found very interesting is that indeed, as we always said in the NGO world, regulation and CSR can coexist. And only regulation in some issues can raise awareness of companies. So we support the conclusion that CSR and targeted legislation provides a better mix than each one would be alone. 3 critical comments. The first one is on the business case. Richard Howitt already said that he thinks we should not too much put emphasis on the business case. The project seems to be looking at the economic benefit of an impact-oriented CSR. It looks at the business and economic case for being responsible, and we tend to look CSR in its link to innovation, competitiveness, economic recovery, and growth. So the business case in the debate is clearly won over the social case. And I think it shouldn't be the main driver in this debate. There is a strong business case, we know it. But first, it is clear that respecting human rights may not necessarily bring short-term advantage and profit-making potential. It can even be costly in the short term to respect human rights and to put policies to ensure better jobs, respect for the environment, etc. So a long-term cost-benefit analysis is needed, but it's too often discouraged by the nature of financial markets. And the second reason why we shouldn't put too much emphasis on the business case, more fundamentally, is that it's just taking the wrong way. You don't respect human rights because it brings a competitive advantage or it makes you more profitable. You respect human rights because it's beyond profit. You need to respect human rights and environment as a part of your license to operate in the society, as it is now stated in many international frameworks such as the OECD guidelines or the UN guiding principles. The second critique I would bring is the issue of materiality, and this is also reflected in the Commission's proposal on non-financial reporting. We tend to focus CSR issues on the issues that are material to the core business. We believe that there are two kinds of risks and impacts. There are the ones what are called material, affecting the company's performance, but there are some impacts that may not be material for a company, but are clearly significant for workers, for the environment. So the fact that we limit CSR to material issues, leave out a few issues that should definitely be addressed, but that are not, because they are considered as not material. And the third critique, and I would tend to disagree with you, Nigel, saying that it is indeed, there will be complex answers and no simple answers there. I think we should not over-complexify this. It seems that companies only talk to them. They're afraid the NGOs will ask them to make 100 pages of report on each and every possible impact in each and every supplier in all the regions. That's not what NGOs are asking for. We think that there's we need to develop tools indeed, and some tools are missing to identify these impacts, and that's why this project, I think, is very good. But we don't need years of discussion and development of methodologies to address the most significant risks and impacts companies have on society. We're talking about common sense, obvious, basic risks that shouldn't be over-complexified. It's a risk that the building collapses in Bangladesh because too many workers are stacked in. It's the risk that the oil spill causes major environmental damage. It's a risk that the worker works 14 hours a day for a very poor salary. It's a risk that a lasagna is sold in a European supermarket and you don't even know what meat is in it, just to not take away these north-south examples. So we're talking about these kinds of risks and impacts. You know, in companies like H&M, CNA, in the garment sector, they kept saying, you know, these issues of safety at work in the supply chain is very complex. 3 months after the tragedy in Bangladesh killing over 1,000 people, 3 months later, they were agreeing on a binding agreement with concrete measures to improve the situation. So again, let's not over-complexify this. The last, and I will try to keep it brief, I think I've gone way beyond the 10 minutes I was allocated for this, but 3 policy debates currently I think are worth linking with this project. First, Richard Howitt already mentioned in the fact that the UN guiding principles on business and human rights are a key element now in this whole debate on business and human rights, and it's actually very much reflected in the new CSR communication. And there is a consensus there around the concept of due diligence. The due diligence is a management process that a reasonable and prudent enterprise needs to undertake to meet its responsibility to respect human rights. In particular, due diligence is a process by which a company identifies, prevents, and mitigates its risks and impacts on society. We have many examples in other sectors of due diligence being made mandatory to companies in corruption, in safety at work, public procurement, importation of illegal timber in the EU market. But due diligence, even Digitrade is thinking of a regulation for extractive industries that would require to conduct due diligence for those working in conflict areas such as Congo. But due diligence is not rocket science. There have been some guidance developed by the UN, by the OECD, by the EU, but I think this kind of project that is very much oriented to identifying impact, and impact is a key word in a good due diligence process. I think this could inform the debate in the EU and also how companies do due diligence. Second policy issue, transparency. This reform on non-financial reporting, it was referred to already several times. We believe there's a consensus among most stakeholders that it is time to step up on transparency, and it's time to have mandatory reporting. Of course, the big debate is how ambitious should it be in terms of what companies need to report, which companies need to report. As you may know, the Commission didn't explicitly include impacts in the elements to be reported by companies. And I read in the report that it is believed that a reporting that does not how is it written in the report, sorry. Policy instruments such as non-financial reporting don't necessarily result in better societal impacts unless they explicitly focus on impacts. And the current proposal doesn't. We see several shortcomings in the Commission proposal that I'm happy to share later. I will not share it now because it's been a bit long already. But yes, we think this reform is important. We're talking about 18,000 companies that would have to do a non-financial report every year. We're just afraid that there are several loopholes there that will make it difficult to have a reporting that is really about what matters, these severe and significant impacts I was talking about. On the EU CSR strategy, which is the last policy issue I wanted to talk about, I won't repeat what I already said. We are disappointed about the lack of achievement there. We think the Commission and Member States, we talk a lot about the Commission indeed, but Member States have, of course, a shared responsibility there. We must go beyond dissemination of good practice, promotion of CSR, simple monitoring of commitments by companies or doing surveys. It is essential to develop guidance, and such projects should be informing this future guidance. But it's also equally important to have regulations that create this level playing field for companies, to avoid that some companies doing a lot on CSR, doing a lot to be socially responsible, compete with others who just don't, at a time where it's not very clear that there's a market reward, an immediate market reward for being responsible. So we need incentives, support and guidance, but we need also rules that apply to all companies. Thank you.
Jerome, thank you for your comprehensive response, which made me quite thirsty. I wonder if you could pass me a glass.
The glass.
Thank you so much. I mean, embedded in what you say there is a support for the fact that I sit on the right hand of Volkswagen, which has spent many years developing its reporting structures and systems, very comprehensive approaches over the years. And I'm also sitting on the far right of Piotr, who has responsibility for the non-financial reporting guidelines, which, Jerome, you've been critical of. So, I mean, the Commission, you are arguing, Jerome, is not necessarily joined up. But in terms of the non-financial reporting guidelines that you're responsible for, is that about responsibility? Is that about accountability? Is that going to drive towards impact or not? I mean, notwithstanding the good work that it provides, maybe you would care to comment on that, Piotr.
First of all, I come from the service that was behind the drafts that you are talking about, but I'm not particularly responsible for this. The individuals who are preparing, working on the CSR proposal and on the guidelines were not able to join us today, and I represent the service that is more related to the financial reporting. So I have a financial reporting background. I work with the financial reporting standardization organizations. I'm also responsible for electronic reporting and for the measures in the transparency for the listed securities in Europe. I work a lot with securities regulators in Europe. But just for the matter of defending the Commission, I think I owe you some explanation. In the first place, I think limiting our vision of the European legislative process just to the Commission is oversimplification. We are working. Of course, we are an instrumental arm of this international organization, which is the European Union. But we work in a complex arrangement with the European Parliament and with the Council. Of course, sometimes we need to step on a very thin line in order to match the vision and the objectives that are put forward and verbalized, sometimes very ambitiously by the European Parliament, and translate into some palpable options that would be digestible for the member states and for the council that needs to put a stamp on it. And of course, you may think that you may make magic in this process. There's not much magic. There is a simple majority issue that needs to be observed, and I can assure that not only on this particular project, but also on many projects that I personally had a chance to observe, the Commission made a very sophisticated arrangements and referred to arguments far from the political and economic standpoint to reach to the imagination of people involved in the member states, in the society, in the businesses, and to make it work. The second thing that we need to bear in mind is the fact that, especially in this CSR project, we are quite relatively early in the process. We are defining the aims of the policy. We are drafting the first policy documents, which is directive. So talking about the implementation plans or some implementation documents that would be put forward for especially for those who need to implement the policy would be kind of premature. So I think we need to also not to put the horse behind the cart. It needs to be all in certain legislative process that is quite well established. It's lengthy, but it works, and I hope it will work also on this occasion. So is the Commission truly committed? I think the Commission is committed. The fact that we are meeting today is one of those evidences that state that fact. Also, I think that we need to keep in mind that there is, apart from the systematic aspect of this legislative process, that that puts the Commission, behind the Parliament and the Council. There's also human resources aspect. The Commission is not only the 28 commissioners nominated by the governments and endorsed by the European Parliament. It's also a number of committed individuals who wants to make a change, who wants to influence the process, and who also can have micro visions that need to find a way, not only in the text of the documents, but also a way to the society and to the outside players in this game. You said that the Commission might put in place a policy that is quite disconnected from the practice. If we see the CSR as a legislative process, which is at its early stages of development, and we especially if you compare other projects were much more difficult to carry on, I would not be that critical. I would say that we are right in time to start thinking about this, but we need to be very careful not to overdo on this thin line. So how to make us really impact the process and make the best of us as a Commission, as a range of resources that is available. I think that this conference is another example. It makes us talk. We can talk to each other. We can talk to the outside players, which is not that evident if you work for a large organization like the Commission. So it's also the role that we can sometimes play, and sometimes we need someone else to play, is to orchestrate a moderated debate. I think that our prerogatives and our mandate sometimes is too much limited to drafting policy papers and drafting legislative documents, but in terms of leading the debate, in promulgating visions, probably either we don't have the mandate, or we need some kind of support from the civil society, also from the academics like you. So I think that we need to create some kind of community of practice in order to carry this message to all the players that need to be involved. Of course, the question of managing the resources is another story. The resources that the Commission possesses is not enough to take leadership in this. I think that this community of practice that we are in the process of creating may very much help in pooling those resources that exist, making those resources available to each other, to the players involved, and also assure the link between the European resources and all that exists in the world. And the last, not to talk too much about this, is the question of visibility. Sometimes your actions, your initiatives are much more visible than the initiatives that we have, even if we assure the presence of the commissioner or some high-level authority. Then, in the question of how the Commission can promote the strategic approach to responsible business, I think that as the response to this question is as simple as you already stated. The number of high-level policy documents should be quite limited. The message should be very simple, and it should be some kind of dialogue with the stakeholders to propagate the vision that is in the policy documents. Maybe you may criticize the Commission that the documents are too long. Maybe the language is not adequate to the language you are using and you understand. But probably there are some considerations that made it more easy to get through the legislative process. Then the next fact that should be put clear here is the need to defend the policy also in the international dialogue. There is a lot of international context where especially the European Commission is a partner, and as it was said earlier in this afternoon, we can use the promotional effect of international dialogues that the Commission leads on behalf of the member states in order to promote anything, and CSR in particular. Just to mention the US transatlantic dialogue, which we may consider far from perfect, but maybe it's just another way to explain our position and also make clear our firmness on the policy and on the vision that we have. Also, the other dialogues, for example, G20 is another occasion to express our long-term visions. There is also a need to mention a range of technical dialogues that the Commission leads. Just to mention the market regulators dialogues that we participate in, the law enforcement authorities that also talk to the Commission bilaterally and multilaterally, standard setting organizations, standard reporting organization, and also some big ideas that we supported in the international context, like open data, big data, government data, transparency, also the OECD initiatives like guidelines and so on. I will just be brief because I know that we are short of time. In the operational policy aspect, I think that apart from the US and transatlantic dialogue, we need to mention here that there are leading regional leaders that Commission initiates dialogue, especially in trade, where ideas like CSR could be and should be promoted, and those regional leaders can take this forward to the relevant communities. In the EU itself, there is also a number of players that, in my view, should and could play an important role, apart from Eurostat, that was mentioned this afternoon. That is, of course, the organizations in financial standards area, also in the member states. We are also talking to the professions, to the analysts and investment professionals, which I think need to understand that there is a great opportunity for professions to fill this gap that will be created by new reported streams of data that will come out from the corporations, and of course that should be somehow understood, somehow evaluated, somehow assessed, and sometimes would also need to be translated into business decisions that, of course, only analysts and investors know the best. There are also other industries that may get involved. Of course, the media industry that may itself promote values and promote values, and I'm absolutely sure that sustainability and corporate sustainability is one of those values that media should not oversee. There are other industries involved, like IT and other industries. I don't want to take more time on this. In terms of actions, this is, as I said, for the future, but I think we may think about various actions, especially targeted on mediatic effects of our policies and initiatives. Those actions should be very much present on the internet. I think because we are very much propagating values that aspire to be fashionable among younger society, and I hope that the freedom of media and transparent internet can assure that there is enough listeners to this message. Also, there might be other ideas like ambassadors of responsible business or some kind of known individuals from the media world that could support this. There might be an idea for the EU methodology incubator for CSR, and friendly business award and so on. So there might be probably enough ideas from us and from you to consume the policy that we accept on the European level. And the last thing, the operational policy. What is the possible CSR mandatory reporting to promote accountability for impact? And I think that in the first place, the mandatory reporting does not immediately imply transparency, and it does not imply an accessibility, it does not imply accuracy, and does not imply awareness. In order to make it accessible, I think we need an online storage and access. There is no other way to reach the target consumers of this information without somehow organized intermediary that would make it instantly available at a click of a button. For the comparability, there is no other way but to seek for a standardized data set. I know there is a lot of international formats that are now being promoted, especially in the wake of the legislative acts in Europe on national and European level. But it's not enough. Also, for the comparability, we need standardized formats of data to make it computer readable and processable. Also, for the comparison of data on industry and on individual companies. That data should lead to certain capacity of the IT that would make it data traceable to location, also traceable to product or service or a supplier, and also make it traceable to specific impacts, risks and benefits. So I think this is from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I am not going to go to the second set of policy questions here about operational policy issues, but what I would like to suggest to you that is in the next few minutes you might like to write down the innovative ways that you see that impacts could penetrate more into European business thinking and practice and European policy. Who would you want to see doing that? And maybe you can discuss that over the reception with the representatives of the impact project. So, because we don't yet have a handbook completely written, so there's an opportunity of including and attributing your ideas if they seem to work. So I'm going to suggest that rather than to open the discussion to questions. If you have questions for our panelists or for others, please leave those until the reception afterwards. Before handing over to Simon to introduce our last speaker, I would like to say that what I hear from this session is a number of points. Firstly, strategy sets some vision, but the importance is implementation that's coherent with strategy and that is joined up. That matters as much for the Commission as it does for companies. Secondly, I hear that European companies are doing good things, and we should not forget that, at the same time that we encourage and support people to do better. Those who are not yet in the lead and those who need to be there in order for Europe to perform in the competitive and in the sustainability space. I hear some interesting ideas. I hear input for some of our panelists is more connected with accountability than responsibility. And that raises some interesting questions for all the academics who have the word responsibility in their titles. Maybe they have to change that to accountability. Maybe we start a trend there. And the other thing is some interesting concepts, which we haven't really discussed at great length, but somehow impact is being connected with three ideas. Due diligence. If you don't know impacts, how can you be diligent? Two words we haven't heard, product stewardship. How can you be a steward if you don't know the impact of what you're doing? And sustainable development implies that you are sustainable in the way that you're developing, which means that you should have some sense of the impacts of what you're doing on a system that may or may not be sustainable. If we can't get those connections right in the coming years, then we do have a problem for what those concepts mean in practice. I'd like to thank our panel for the comments and observations that they've given us and the food for thought, and I'd like to thank you for your tolerance in having a session without any questions from the floor. Thank you very much. Simon, I pass to you. Thank you, speakers.